gone black. It's gone dark, Dave. Help, help. It's gone dark. Welcome, everybody, to Talking Niagara. I'll let Dave catch up in a minute. I don't know what happened. I went live, he was on, and by the time we'd gone live, he was gone. So it is Friday, January 31st, 2025. 1 month down in the year. And here we are at Talking Niagara. We bring you the news every weekday morning for Niagara Falls and surrounding areas in a talk show format. So we talk about some of what's going on in the world, and especially that impacts us here. I don't know what's happened with Dave. Dave, all is forgiven. Please come back. Oh, he's gone. He's gone. Lost a connection clearly there. Okay, so we'll give it a couple of give it a minute or so for him to come back. I'm sure he will. Okay, so some of the news that we're going to be talking about today is the ceasefire is holding in Gaza, Ukraine drone strikes, and more about migrant workers being abused, right? And also, we'll come back to the question of tariffs, particularly in the wine industry, okay? And potentially, if we get there, the Our Foundation is celebrating half a century of healing, and Niagara Parks is partnering with the Bridge to reduce food insecurity. There we go. All right, so what's going on? Well, yes, good question there. Good question there, Gary. Yeah, the state of emergency. That's nothing but. There's nothing but really a statement to say that they believe that they can't handle the situation. And I think that's basically where we are. They can't handle the situation. The city is in a mess. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, the region withdrew the state of emergency recently. They withdrew the state of emergency. They declared the state of emergency, hoping to get more funding from the province or somewhere else. But they withdrew that in a council meeting not long ago. I think we reported it here on Talking Niagara, and I can't remember the reasons why they withdrew it. Probably because nothing was getting done that way.
I think that's more. Yeah, that's more why. Yeah.
And Gary has also said that Ruth Ann, of course, now a candidate for the running for the Conservatives, stated she'd be one to help the homeless. But do remember, Gary, just about every councillor has said that at one time or another. And matter of fact, the election prior to this previous one, that was a big deal. When you went to meet the candidates, every one of them had would state that we have to do something about the homeless and so on. But all have failed, and not on their own fault. I'm sure Newestag and others would want to do something, honestly do want to do something about the homeless situation, as we do all want to do, but they found that they can't find it.
Yep.
Smoke and mirrors, Mr. Wheels. Oh yeah. Well, yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Like I've sort of imagined myself, what would I have done if I was a counselor in this particular case? There's nothing really much to do. You can see what Lori has said when the notwithstanding clause was brought up to bring these in, and she just pretty much noted that we have all kinds of different programs and there's people out there, but not enough is being applied to this. I think this is a problem that's all over Ontario. And we do have throughout Ontario probably a lot of politicians and council people of one kind or another, politicians on every level that obviously want to get something done about this, but can't find a way and method to do it. And we can say as many things as we want, but until we come up with a plan, a strategy, it's not going to work. Like I said before, when I went to meet the candidates a couple of 1 or 2 elections ago, they all had a lot to say about homelessness and how it should be solved, and yet that has never been coordinated well enough.
Yeah.
I think we need a plan that we can get behind, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And I think that's the real problem. If you seriously want to do this, you're going to have to it's going to cost a lot of money. That's why people are getting frustrated and want to remove the constitutional rights from some people, which is kind of a slippery slope.
Yes, I think many people have got plans, Gary, and your plan, my plan, will probably both work, but they're not listening to us.
No, there's, I mean, other countries have had better success. Apparently, Finland has had a fair amount of success.
Finland has had
they build little houses.
Because yeah, exactly, and that's one of the things that Laurie proposed, that we build tiny homes. That was laughed under the table.
Well, they've tried that in New Brunswick. When I was there for a Kiwanis convention in Fredericton a couple of years ago, they have a local person from the little city. I mean, it's only about 40,000 people. Made good, and became a multimillionaire. And he bought a piece of land outside the city, and that's what he was intending to do. We learned about it, and he was applying his own personal fortune to that. But that is a man with an idea, with a plan.
Yeah, with a plan. Yeah, and it's a good idea. It's a good idea, right? Okay, so those are good ideas, and we need to do something like that. And we've successfully failed to do anything of that nature to resolve.
Well, we've all focused in on the plight of the homeless, and we make sure that they get fed, and we make sure that they get clothed. And even in these places like Summer Street and Buchanan Street, they allow them to do substance abuse in those places, hoping that they don't go too far away from the residents and get into trouble. As long as they come in and use the substance and tell them what it is, it doesn't always work, and that's raised eyebrows and things like that. But should that be part of the plan? And I think it's a Band-Aid solution, Band-Aid after Band-Aid. When the cut gets bigger, you put another Band-Aid on it rather than take away the knife.
So the fire that was referred to was a homeless encampment fire on Bridge in Victoria. I haven't seen one. I know the encampment in question. When did the fire occur?
Well, Gary sent a photograph. Well, Gary sent a photograph of it. At the time, he didn't tell me where that encampment was.
Oh, okay. So last night. Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, all right. Because I can.
And
if that were on fire, I could see it from my house. Right.
What we do is we can't dismantle the homeless encampments because we don't have other places for them to go. But at the same time, the homeless encampments can be very dangerous places.
Yeah, but we need to put them somewhere. We need to put them somewhere else.
We are definitely in a catch-22 situation. We have to have a solid plan to deal with it, and it has to come to the front burner, as Gary said.
As Gary says, 100%. I 100% agree with that. But the city got very little interest. City and region seem to be passing the buck.
Well, because it's going to take money. It's going to take a plan. They're really going to have to get organized, get the region and the cities together in a room.
Well, in fact,
what is our plan? What is our plan?
In fact, actually, what it takes is having the feds and the province release money to the municipalities for this, for this purpose.
Yeah, but they're going to ask for a plan, and that's what we need. We need a plan.
We need a plan.
And it has to be a plan looking into the future. Like I said, all of our plans up until this time have been to respond to their immediate needs. Clothing, food.
But we need to get beyond the clothing and the feeding. We need to actually get to where they're going to stay.
Yes, but like I've said before, with the amount of homeless people and because of their drug addictions and mental health issues behave poorly, they are now they were a source of our sympathy before, but now they're a source of our agitation. They are becoming more and more, and I've said this over and over, they're going to be the shantytown people. The tents are the same as the shantytowns, and they're going to be viewed as the wastrels and offscourings of society, where we get more and more annoyed at them, and less and less empathetic to this. This is a bad way to go too, because once you now begin to think of them as citizens that have no hope of rehabilitating and are going to be a constant nuisance and annoyance, then you're going to get people who think, well, maybe it is better to round them up and put them in a camp.
But then, you know what those camps then remind me of to some extent, right? You know what they remind me of to some extent? Gaza.
Yeah, it could be a lot of the native reservations or something like that, where they're put on a place and then forgotten about.
Yeah, get over there, out of sight, out of mind, and do your thing over there. Just but don't leave the area.
Well, Gaza was a good analogy. It was a fenced off piece of property. And to which the Israelis say, see, this is a Palestinian state. They got their own land, but nothing could go in and out without the Israelis watching. The fishermen couldn't even go farther past their certain boundaries at sea. Food supplies, electrical supplies, everything controlled. No passports, no that kind of thing. So, do we want to do that to them?
Yeah, and our city pretends they don't exist and look right through it and like they are nothing. I suggest that we release the upper river boom in Fort Erie. I'm not so sure that's a good idea at the moment.
Anyway, I don't know the implications of that right now.
Yeah, I think that's an unwise thing to do at the moment. But I get what he's saying about if you release the boom, ice comes down the river, and ice will ice will chase those smugglers away because they won't know how to deal with it. That's what I think. That's what I think Gary is saying. All right, okay. Moving on. 500,000 people are returning to North Gaza as the ceasefire is holding. Right? They have.
You really have to kind of admire the Palestinians for their ability to withstand incredible conditions. They have survived inside a fenced-in area, being bombed to crap, probably around at least around 60,000 have died. The official number is like around 48,000, but they don't know how many people are under the rubble.
They found about 40 bodies under the rubble as they've started clearing up.
Yeah, and there is only going to be more. So the Palestinians, when Trump says, well, we got to get rid of them so we can clean the place up. Well, even if he was honest about that, what he wants to do is get the Palestinians out of there and keep them out of there, because Trump can thump his chest all he wants to Canada or Greenland or Panama, these lesser powers close by. But when it comes to the Israeli lobby, he gets bullied right back. He is their slave, basically, as most U.S. politicians are. He is marching to the tune of the Israeli lobby. He isn't really concerned about the Palestinians at all, one bit. He knows that his part of his campaign was funded by Adelson, which is a prominent Zionist, who he took money from her husband in his first campaign and promised to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which he did. And they took the Golan Heights and they called it Trump Heights and all that. But that's an adversary he can't face to face. The Israeli lobby and Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a lot more clever than Trump. Trump can thump his chest, but he's the one that's being pulled around by the nose, just like Biden, basically. That's powerful a political influence for Trump. He needs he can't irritate that part of his backing. You know what I mean? So he can go around and bully us and bully Mexico and bully Greenland, but he's not going to be able to do much.
Well, and he made this statement about last week about moving, having them leave Gaza and live in neighboring countries, right? Okay,
I don't know if he said that out of ignorance or said it out of just as a kind of a challenge. But he knows, if he knows anything, if those Palestinians are pushed into Jordan and Egypt, both those countries will have a revolt.
Yeah,
they will have a revolt. Both Egypt and Jordan already have millions of Palestinians already in their country. All the Arab countries, when they said that the Arab countries, how come the Arab countries aren't taking these Palestinians out of Gaza during the war? Well, the fact of the matter is they already have done, because this began back in 1897, and there has been a lot of, even in Iraq, there was a lot of Palestinians in Iraq, because they were being pushed out of what is called Israel now. Yeah, and this is something where Trump he's really got to wake up and learn a few lessons, because if you do that, if you start pushing people around like that, that's going to destabilize Jordan and Egypt,
the whole area. Egypt, Jordan, and other Middle Eastern Arab nations. The other thing, though, is that so Israel has been releasing Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have been convicted of crimes. 3 Israelis, 1 male, 2 female, and 5 Thai nationals have been released from captivity in Gaza. And Hamas have confirmed the killing of military commander Mohammed Dave. Dave back in July. Yeah. The other thing is that the armed wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades, has said that 3 captives, Ofer Calderon, Keith Siegel, and Yarden Bibas, will be freed tomorrow in Gaza. Tomorrow being February the 1st.
Yeah, the real problem here is I don't trust Netanyahu, and nobody should. Uh, they're releasing these hostages. I'm afraid when they get all of them back, they're going to create some kind of incident where they can start bombing the crap out of these people again. That's my real fear, is
Yeah.
that they will create an incident of some kind or another, or take advantage of an incident and blow it up and say, well, we got to start all over again. What we found out so far, what it appears, is if the Israelis did not take out too much of the Qassam brigades, they've been bombing the crap out of, saying that they've killed X amount of, like 10 or 15,000 of the Hamas soldiers. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, there's all kinds of Hamas soldiers there. Obviously, they didn't get too many of them. And the other thing that Blinken has said, which was frustrating to him, every time a bomb was dropped in Gaza, two young men would join Hamas, because they're fighting for their people. They're fighting for their country. Look what happened in Russia during the Second World War. Stalin was a brutal. Nobody liked him, but when the Nazis invaded, all the Russians joined up in waves to fight the Nazis, and they were fighting for their country. They weren't fighting for Stalin, and that's
they were
what
fighting. They were fighting to get back that land.
yes, and they were fighting to protect Mother Russia. Well, it's the same thing now. Most of the young men who have joined Hamas have no political affiliation with them at all. It's that they are trying to protect their land, and they're trying to protect their families.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, actually, that eastern seaboard, that eastern part of the Second World War, that eastern front was actually the largest armies on both sides. Largest amount.
80% of the soldiers, of German soldiers died on the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
80%. The usual calculation. Now, this may come as a surprise to a lot of people out there, but the usual equation, and this comes from American historian, 80% of the fighting was done by the Russians, and 80% of the war was paid for by the United States. So the Americans supplied, it's kind of like what they're doing in Ukraine. They're supplying most of the weapons for the war, but not doing that much fighting, kind of thing.
Okay. Well, while we talk about Ukraine, let's move to Ukraine. Drone strikes of an oil refinery in Russian town of Kostov, about 800 kilometers from the front lines of eastern Ukraine, happened. 4 drones hit a Lukoil company depot, and Ukrainian media has said that they're adding that the facility suffered significant damage. Videos posted on social media showed massive flames. The governor of the region of Smolensk said in a telegram that massive drone attack against the civilian infrastructure has occurred in his region, although no casualties had been reported.
Well, that's a lucky thing. It is a massive. Well, it's a bit of a victory for the Ukrainians, but it seems
it's got to be upsetting the supply lines to the war, I would guess, as well.
Yeah, and that oil, well, some of it, of course, the refined parts of it would probably go to the war effort, but more of it would go off to sell, and I think that's the real problem there. They're trying to reduce the Russians' ability to pay for the war, and oil is their main source of income. And to reduce the amount of oil and that the Russians could sell, it is probably a bit of a victory. But the reality on the ground there is that Ukrainian soldiers are deserting in huge numbers. The the Russians are steadily, inch by inch, beating the Ukrainians by attrition. The Ukrainian
Not
soldiers,
surprising.
the Ukrainian soldiers are leaving, deserting by en masse, all over the place. We find them in other places of the world. The Ukrainians sent a bunch of soldiers, new soldiers, to France to be trained, and a whole pile of them just kind of disappeared right away. The same thing is happening in Israel, by the way. There are more and more Israeli soldiers kind of leaving and departing and not coming back, and many more of them that are called up are not showing up for their the war in Gaza.
For the military service that they have to. Well, actually, remember, every Israeli has to do military service, don't they?
Yeah, but what they're finding is they're calling up soldiers and they're not showing up, or dodging and not being cooperative. This because in Gaza there was a lot of Israeli casualties, much more than have been reported apparently, and the Israeli soldiers, young soldiers, are refusing to show up for duty. They're having manpower shortage just because Israel is only a certain amount of people, and they've got war fronts in Lebanon. They've got a war front in Syria. They have a war front, of course, in Gaza, and then they also have to maintain their border integrity. And of course, they're launching war measures in the West Bank. This has stretched them out pretty thinly.
Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons why they're getting a peace deal in Gaza right now. But I think pretty much Netanyahu is just refreshing his troops during this peace deal, and will find some reason to continue the attack. But he might have to withdraw forces.
Well, also, the withdrawal from Gaza allows them to maintain that position in the Golan Heights, which is likely to come under threat in the forthcoming weeks once Syria readjusts itself.
No, they're well into Syria. They're well beyond the Golan Heights.
I know they are. Yeah,
they have set up security zones inside their land, of which, of course, the Zionists would like to claim for part of the Greater Israel project. Well, what we don't understand here is the Greater Israel idea. The Greater Israel is a much bigger place than what is Israel. The Zionists have always wanted the West Bank, Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, parts of Syria and Lebanon and Jordan as part of the Greater Israel. And one of the Zionist attitudes basically is to take both sides of the river, both sides of the Jordan River, which would leave Jordan. That means pushing into Jordan's space.
Yeah.
We'll see how all that works out. But right now, the Ukrainian war is not doing well for as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, and Putin sees that this is kind of working, and he's said, "Okay, I'm willing to do a peace deal, but I'm not going to do a peace deal with Zelensky because he's a usurper and he didn't get that position legally or by election." That kind of thing.
Yeah, who with though?
Well, he's referring to, I think, Lukashenko, who was the previous one that got. There was a coup. Don't forget, there was a coup in Ukraine, where a democratically elected president was had to flee because of insurrections in Ukraine that ultimately led to this war.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. And what was the other thing that was to be pointed out? So apparently there were more than 100 drones flying across Russia, and apparently they shut down the airports in St. Petersburg and Kazan due to suspended overnight because of the drones. But they shut down more. Russians have shot down more than 100 Ukrainian drones.
Well, this is you're going to find a lot of aggressiveness from the Ukrainians and bringing the war to the Russians in Russia, because they're going to need bargaining chips. They're going to have to demonstrate what they can do and sort of alarm the Russian Federation, the people of Russia, basically.
Yeah.
When the war comes to Russia and does damage in Russia, like the refineries there or airports or whatever else.
Well, that hits the commercial infrastructure.
Yeah, and it puts fear into the average person, who the average person doesn't have a whole lot of love for any kind of war. So that gives the Zelensky a bit of a bargaining chip. We'll stop doing this if this is part of the conditions of the war. We'll stop doing this and you stop doing that, etc. Unfortunately, right now, Russia's in the driver's seat. Their economy is holding up well enough. The money they have coming in from oil is holding up well enough. That's why Trump has tried to put the pressure on Saudi Arabia to reduce the cost of oil so that they can starve out Russia. Russia needs a price of at least about $50 a barrel to be able to sustain itself. If the Saudi Arabia floods the market with cheaper oil, then the Russians cannot sustain the money they have that is funding the war. So that's part of the strategy. However, at the moment, the Russians are winning a war of attrition. They're taking an inch here, an inch there, in which the Ukrainians cannot respond. Now, the Ukrainians went up into Kursk and launched an attack there as to demonstrate what they can do. We could take a piece of Russia. Well, in Kursk, the Russians did not respond with a massive counterattack. What they did instead is resisted any further move by the Ukrainians into their territory, and then instead of counterattacking in a big way, did the same sort of attritional war they're doing in the rest of Ukraine, an inch at a time, so they can overwhelm areas and pressure areas where the Ukrainians cannot sustain the defenses. Because the Russians have more weapons, more artillery shells, and they move inch by inch by inch by inch. So they're just putting them in a gradual vice that's squeezing a little more every day. And unfortunately, I believe that Ukrainians are exhausted. The one thing that I agree with Trump, and I don't agree with him much, is this war should never have happened. I've said that on the show I was super angry about the whole thing for a whole year. This war should never have happened. This is
absolutely never happened. Yeah.
And I put the blame right on Biden. I don't know if it's his dementia was a problem, but all he did when asked about the war and the continuing of the war, Biden said, well, the armaments for that war are built by good union jobs. What a silly thing to say. Okay, yeah, well, there's war going on and this is a disaster for that part of the world, but guess what? Those weapons we're sending over there are made with good union jobs. Seriously? That's important to you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally the wrong attitude. Yeah, the weapons may well be made with union jobs, and for union people like yourself, that might well be important, but that's not helping the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, good union jobs to build up armaments in peacetime to make sure that there's no war. Yeah, that's a thing too, and also,
and you know. Yeah, putting the unions in or out of it's immaterial anyway, really, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it is. It
Yeah, it's
doesn't make.
not a union thing. It really isn't, and that's a separate argument entirely, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
But a lot of people have made a lot of money off that war.
yeah,
And the military industrial complex. One time I was very, very surprised to see how many senators and congressmen had stocks and other things, financial interests in the military industrial complex. They of course gets a heads up on contracts and stuff, and know when to buy stock or whatever.
yeah. Oh
It's
yeah,
corrupt.
yep, it is. Okay. Amnesty International says that migrant workers are being abused, and they're even utilizing the term slavery, right? And this individual that they're focusing in on, her name is Gabrielle. No, there's a couple of individuals. There's Benedict Carol Zay, who she had to pay to work on a poultry farm. She had to pay $10,000 in recruitment fees to come here, and she was forced to work 70 or 80 hours a week, was sexually abused, and her boss controlled her banking and threatened her with deportation on many occasions. And another one, a Cameroon woman, was basically exploited and abused. And these are in an Amnesty International report.
Well, we've heard this before. We brought this up on the show that Amnesty International called the Canadian migration system for the temporary workers as slave labor, and there was a boundless amounts of abuse. Well, at first I kind of thought, well, that was an overstatement, but I've since had to retract that. It was a terrible abuse of the system when Canada opened its doors to a lot of temporary workers from after COVID there, when there was a labor shortage. They didn't control it well enough. And what happened, it wasn't controlled through government. What happened is the people who normally would have paid people smugglers to come into Canada, paid recruitment officers to get them into Canada. And of course, this is in the country of origin, $10,000 just to get here. And then they would start working, but they were not protected by the Canadian government. They were put into slave labor, basically. Basically, it was just a method by which people smugglers and criminals got more people into Canada and got money off of them for doing that. Imagine a Cameroonian, which is a fairly poor country, coming up with $10,000 to get into Canada, and they were able to do that. These gangs of recruitment officers, sort of, and I say that sarcastically, took advantage of Canada's temporary.
Give us 10,000, give us 10 grand, and we'll get you into Canada. Is more or less what they're saying, right?
Yeah, and the reason why they were able to get these people into Canada was under the temporary work programs, temporary worker programs. The Canadian government brought in a whole lot of temporary and allowed a lot of people come in, but did not monitor it. They did not see where these people are coming. These people were victimized by people smugglers, just as the refugees were along the Mexican border. And when they got in here, the Canadian government kind of didn't see or didn't want to see what was going on. So companies and things were using these people and exploiting them. She's saying that they were even sexually abusing them, but they had no protection, and they were living like animals. And
this isn't the only
all under the temporary work program.
Yeah, there's two of these people that have been mentioned in this report. One is from Cameroon, and the other is from Jamaica, Gabrielle, who's from Jamaica. She said, Canada's destroyed me. And she alleged that her supervisors would utter racial slurs, threaten to send her back to the tree you came from.
Yes. Well, I mean, the level of it, the kind of abuses, well, you know, you can, they're very typical, but a lot of the refugees that come into the country and under the temporary work program, and this is where Amnesty International gets in here. You have a temporary work program where you've invited a lot of people here to come in and work as temporary workers. Then you allow them to be treated appallingly.
Yeah. And they're basically saying that a lot of the abuses, they call it labor exploitation of migrant workers, and there's wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and abuse of race and gender-based violence.
And the reason why they are even able to get into the country is because of the temporary work program that the Feds came up with. Now, this is another indication of how the Feds and the Immigration Department are utterly clueless. Utterly clueless. They are so unprofessional. They are so weak-minded. I can't stop thinking of slurs for them. Basically, they opened up our border to Mexicans, right? They stopped the visas. They took care of a lot of backlog of visas by reducing the amount of qualifications these people had to have, and they started this temporary work program, allowed floods of people to come in and not protected their rights, not protected them, just opened their borders. This is so amateurish, and no wonder. And this is part of the reason, the ramifications of this is part of the reasons why the Trump administration is able to bully us, because they are right. We do have a pathetic immigration system. We do have an immigration system that would allow just about anybody, from a terrorist to a mafia boss, to get in here easily. And I don't know.
Well,
across as so foolish, I'm telling you.
We have here in this region, though, a number of temporary workers that have actually come here. They've been treated well. They've done their jobs. They actually make good money in comparison to what they would back home.
That's completely different, though. You're talking about.
Yeah, I know. But these are people who've been here for many, many years and have worked here on a regular basis. But dare I say, what we need to do is to terminate this temporary worker program.
Well, yeah, I think they have done that, and they've done a lot of things now. Now, they started before Trump started to thump his chest, but they were moving slowly, as we see immigration things, and Trudeau even apologizing for the amount of people they brought in on temporary. But the fact of the matter is, they put no thought to it ahead of time.
No,
they did
not think about it.
Ramifications of anything, and that's because they live in an ivory tower. They live in fenced-in communities. They're elitists. They don't. Oh wow, well, we'll let these poor people come here and work, and yet then those poor people are victimized by people smugglers, or, I mean, Amnesty International is calling out slave labor conditions that happen in Canada. How humiliating. And once I found that at first I thought it was overstatement, part of the woke agenda of the UN or something. No, I looked into it. No, it's not. They are abused. It was pathetic planning on the Liberals' part. Geez, it humiliates me to have people like that who have no concern for human beings at all. Oh, we'll let them in and their life will be good. No, it's not. They're abused. I don't know. I'm in a bad mood today.
It's the abuse that I can't stand. The fact there are many people who, there are many employers of temporary workers that would not abuse the system, that abuse the system the way it's supposed to be used. And like many of our farmers here in the Niagara region have utilized temporary foreign workers from decades, right? So those are the people who generally don't abuse the system. But there are others, like the ones in this report, that do abuse the system. It's the ones in this report that are, dare I say, the scum of the earth.
Look, Amnesty International calls, it says it's inherently exploitive. And Amnesty calls the temporary foreign work program inherently explosive and discriminatory because it gives employers too much power over foreign employees, the organization says. Now, remember this, those jobs that they're giving, are exploiting these people to do are jobs that Canadians should have been doing. And when you bring in temporary workers and they're too afraid to say anything and they work like slaves for paltry wages, shuts out other Canadians that could have had a good job if these things were monitored correctly. There's as well also predominantly targeting racialized workers from Global South. So you take a person that doesn't know the language and is from a poor country, and of course now they're very afraid. They can't say anything. Now,
both of these,
what has happened here is another thing, is once these employers are shaken down for this and identified and sort of put straight, they then are allowed to employ more temporary foreign workers. Seriously? So you go in there and you tell them, you're like, stop doing this, and then you let them go and hire more.
Yeah, that's wrong. Absolutely wrong. How dare you?
And the UN report that we talked about back in July called this a breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. First I said I dismissed this. I thought it was an overstatement. But in a statement to the CBC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada says it is continuously taking steps to strengthen its temporary foreign worker programs, including employers to provide health insurance, providing charging, recruitment, and all that. Baloney. Obviously, it's not happening. This is a problem for all people, even immigrants that come into the country sometimes get themselves locked into slave workings. We heard about a lot of Chinese people who got into the country and find themselves in a sweatshop. And we're not doing what we should be doing. We just kind of, somebody says, well, we need a lot more laborers, and the government opens the door, here you go, and then lets them be abused this way.
Yeah. And this kind of attitude about abuse, if a company abuses a temporary worker, whether it's an individual like abuse, sexual abuse, obviously that's an individual person responsible for that. Whether that's a company manager doing it on their own without any authority of the company, well, God, I hope it is, or the top man in the company doing it, basically that company should be banned from use of the temporary worker program ever again.
I don't know. Like the temporary, the guest workers we come here to work on our farms and stuff from the islands and from Central America, they come here, they get their health care is taken care of. Their housing is taken care of. Their food and lodgings are taken care of. And then they are paid for doing the work that they do, and they go back home. This is how it should be done.
Yeah.
This is part of the problem they have in the United States. They have guest worker programs like we do here, but they don't have them thorough enough. So the greedy farmers want to use illegals because they don't have to pay them. They don't have to use the guidelines of the guest workers, which are cheap enough, but you can get them even cheaper if you take a bunch of illegals and throw them in your field. You don't have to pay them, and you can scare them all the time. And that's what's happening here in Canada with this. It is an incredible embarrassment for me. It makes me fume. How can you not know this was going to happen? How can you not know that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it needs to be shut down now, and it needs to be replaced.
Seriously.
Yeah. It's the only thing we can really do is shut it, close it.
I
take these amnesty reports very, very seriously because, what we're seeing in this thing is, sexual abuse, racial slurs. These are not things we as Canadians should be accepting.
No, I reject it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And the contradictions in our system are incredible. You have temporary work people that have come into the country legally because the Canadian government allowed these temporary workers to come in legally, and then they're being treated like rubbish. And yet people that have come into the country illegally, refugees that come into the country illegally, are put in hotels and fed, and right here in our town. What's going on here? Like you legally, somebody goes by the rules, basically. I mean, it may not have been a good program, but they went by the rules. They came in as temporary workers. They get abused, but people that come in illegally into the country as refugees are put up in hotels and fed. What's that tell you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's disgusting. It needs to be stopped. And, I was like you. When I first saw this report, the original Amnesty report, I couldn't believe it was true. After all, this is Canada. This is a Western nation, a democratic nation. How dare this sort of thing go on here? But now, this is, this is just unbelievable.
I thought it was woke overstatement, basically. How the tendencies are always to blame the West for the colonialization and all that kind of thing. But when you look into it a little bit deeper, no, these abuses were real, and I place the blame on the Canadian. Well, seriously, I'll go right back to this. How dumb are they? When they when they eliminated the visas for Mexicans to come into the country, what do you think is going to happen?
Yep.
Thousands come into the country. Thousands try to get over the border of the States. And when they couldn't, thousands did a refugee claim, which means they're going to be staying here for at least 3 years before that claim is addressed. Dumb, dumb, dumb. How could you not see that was going to happen? When you reduce the requirements for visas to come into the country to take care of a backlog of visas, we've got too many people looking for visas, and we haven't been able to put them out fast enough. So guess what? We'll put them out real fast by reducing the qualifications you need for that visa. What do you think is going to happen? Massive amounts of people start showing up in Canada, and if they can't sneak into the States, what do? They try. They
come here
status.
Yeah,
which means they have to stay long enough for the refugee status, and of course they can just disappear into the ether then, which costs Canadian taxpayers incredible amounts of money in an extremely ineffective and foolish system.
And many of the Mexicans are simply heading across the U.S. Through the northern border anyway.
Yeah, trying to.
Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Amnesty. All right. Basically, there are two phases for the tariff threats to Canada. One, the U.S. has revealed two-stage process for Mexico and Canada. and they will face initial trade threats within days, and again broader threats later in the spring. So tariffs now and tariffs later.
Yeah, the ones they're rethinking the oil one. Of course, that would affect them too much. Now, Lutnick, however, is more scary than Trump. Basically, what he is saying is basically they want total U.S. hegemony. They want the rest of the world to pay for their rising deficits, and they're going to do that by tariffs. And one of the things they're going to do is try to reestablish lost industrial jobs in the U.S., or at least increase them by taking them away from other places. And one of the places they're going to take them away from is Canada. So what they're going to do is make it difficult for Canadian industry to do what they want to do, and then invite that industry into the United States. So if you think of something like the immediate tariff thing was to address the fentanyl and the border issue, but they don't have that much of an argument in that. Another thing that doesn't come up very.
Well, the illegal immigrants maybe, but not the fentanyl.
Another thing that comes up that doesn't come up very often is the America's frustration of money laundering happening in Canada. We have a weak system, and money laundering is flourishing in Canada, and is not enforced well enough, and that is a problem for the United States. So the fentanyl part is part of the problem, but the money laundering for drug use. What?
I'm sorry, but hey, the 2008 crisis, 2007-8 crisis in the American banking industry was because they didn't have those positions in anything in place to stop money laundering.
Well, that was money laundering on a large scale, but you're not going to be able to go to the bargaining table and say, look what you did back in 2008, how far that's going to get you. No. So what they're talking about here is money laundering of criminal actions, and probably that involves fentanyl smuggling. Now, the fentanyl might not go across the border, but the Canadians are allowing money laundering to happen. So even if the drug cartel or whatever is not bringing the fentanyl from Canada, they're laundering their illicit gains through Canada. So that was part of the thing. But the biggest and scariest thing to me with Lutnick is they're going to try to steal as much industry from other countries as possible by using their power to put tariffs on. Now, the initial tariffs will be bad enough, even if they happen or don't happen. The thing that really bothers me is what's going to come in April. So what they're going to do is they're going to study, and Lutnick has said this, study where to put tariffs on for longer terms. And this will be targeting Canadian industries that they want in the United States. So if you're see all those electric cars that are being made in Canada, we're going to put big tariffs on them so that we can bring those jobs here. We'll make our own electric cars and make sure we can block Canadian electric cars from coming into the country. So what they're doing is they're picking on their friends first. They're not going after jobs outside of the country. That they're going after jobs that are close by. They're going to try to take the jobs away from Canada and bring them back into the United States. We are an easy target for that. So if you are making, making tables and chairs, and the United States wants that industry and sees that it can do tables and chairs too, it'll put a big tariff on furniture manufacturing in Canada, so the United States can start building up their own furniture manufacturing. They're going to make sure that you can only buy a U.S. table and chair.
But again, with companies like Ford or GM, let's say, Ford and GM make cars on both sides of the border, right? And they transport them. They have transported them with ease across the border wherever they need to sell them. So if there are more cars being sold in Toronto, they'll bring cars in from the US to supplement the Toronto market. If there are more cars being sold in Cleveland, they'll bring Canadian cars in to supplement the Cleveland market.
Well, yeah. Well, they're going to change that. What they want to do is change that. They want to stop the cross-border manufacturing of cars, basically, and make sure that the ones that are sold in the United States are the ones manufactured and the parts manufactured for them in the States. They're going to do as much of that as possible. If right now they require X amount of parts from Canada, let's say in their own assembly, in their own assembly plants in the United States, and they need 50% of their parts that come from Canada, what they're going to do is they're going to start targeting all those different parts and make sure that they can, or try to make sure that they can produce more and more and more of those parts, so that Canada will then be supplying 40% and then supplying 30% and then supplying 20%. This is a means by which to make America great again by stealing. And they can steal it because they have a big club, and they have the economic.
Again, it doesn't address the jobs that they've exported to China and the like over the years.
Well, that's the biggest problem here. What I see, we have always been a cooperative trade.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't devalue our dollar. We don't use near slave labor to put our stuff together. We allow our currency to float. It's harder to go after China, so they're going after the easy ones. They're going after us because we're easy to push around. China is a lot less easier to push around. China owns part of the U.S. debt, so they're not as easy to push around. And the Chinese can respond. We can't respond. So if the U.S. puts a 25% tariff on a Chinese light bulb, then the Chinese will just produce it for 25% less. We can't do that because we don't have that centralized. So it's harder to fight China. It's easy to steal from Canada rather than to steal back. And we're right about that. The American industrialists, or the Western capitalists, are the ones that put the money there, moved our industry to China, and they did that and put themselves on the back foot. They can't retrieve that from China so easily, but they can take our stuff.
Yeah. All right. And we're going to have to leave it at that point.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem is the tariffs that are going to come in April, because it really is how much they can take out of Canada, and they're planning to do it. They're planning, how can we get all of the cars built in U.S.? How can we shut off the Canadian production? And take that production here? And Ludnick has said to the United States that life is going to get a little more costlier as this goes on, but in the end, we'll take all these industries back and we'll have them back here. So in the short term, life is going to be more expensive. Oh boy, I hope these 4 terms under Trump go fast.
Yeah. All right. And
bring back Biden.
We can leave it. We can leave it there.
Yeah. Okay. Without further ado, I bid you adieu.